Welcome to tonight's meeting. My name is Councillor Sharon Holder. I'm Chair of the Children and Education Policy and Accountability Committee. This meeting is being streamed on YouTube. If you'd like to remind, I would like to remind all participants of a few housekeeping points. Please keep your microphones muted unless you are speaking. Please wait until I call you to speak. And can officers introduce themselves before speaking for the first time? Understood? Apologies for absence is item number 1. I have here a note from Matt Jenkins, who he aims to join us slightly later. Item number 2, roll call and declarations of interest. I will now do a roll call to confirm the committee members in attendance. When called on, please say present and note any declarations of interest. Councillor Richardson. Councillor Sanderson.
Present and no declarations of interest.
Councillor Sadiq. Councillor Sadiq.
He's frozen on my screen.
Oh, okay. Councillor Loveday.
Present and no declarations.
Eleanor Allen.
Present and no declarations.
Thank you. Nandini Ganesh.
Present and no declarations.
I've commented on Matt Jenkins already. Nadia Taylor.
Present and no declarations.
Thank you very much, everybody. Minutes and matters arising. Update on actions from the previous meeting, as members will already know, have been circulated. However, to address the action on the financial impact of COVID-19, I'd like to invite Tony Burton to give us a short update. Are you okay with Tony?
Yep. Hi, Councillor Holder. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Just to introduce myself, I'm Tony Burton. I'm the Head of Finance for Children's Services and Education. I'm going to share my screen with you. I'm going to talk very briefly, as Councillor Holder requested, around the COVID-19 funding and expenditure within the department and across education. If you bear with me, it should be connecting now. If someone mind letting me know if you can see that.
Yes.
Slide. Okay, brilliant. Try and make it a bit bigger for you. Very briefly, I'm going to start with the funding. This is going to be covered at Finance and Governance Pack in some detail in due course. So this is just a bit of a high-level flavour for you following the request at the last CPAC. So in terms of general government funding to local authorities, Hammersmith and Fulham have received 13.5 million of non-ring-fenced general government grant, and that's across tranches 1 to 3. We've also received limited specific targeted government funding for specific areas across the local authority. The grant funding announced to date is not sufficient to meet all the costs and loss of income that the local authority has been tracking and monitoring since the start of the emergency. The government have also announced an income compensation scheme. Local authorities have lost significant income and projected to lose further income as the COVID-19 emergency progresses. So the government scheme around income compensation is that local authorities must bear the first 5% of income losses, and then they can claim, they can only claim from the government 75 pence in the pound for lost fees and charges. In terms of specific funding relevant to children's services at the moment, in terms of what's been announced, there is a local authority emergency assistance grant for food and essential supplies, and we expect to apply that in part to support families in need with emergency assistance within the borough. There's also a Wellbeing for Education grant, which is a specific grant to support the aims of the Wellbeing for Return to Education project. Before I move on to the next slide, should I deal with any questions on that first slide?
No.
Okay, I'll just move on. So in terms of, I think the question from the last CPAC was what are children's services and education spending as part of the emergency response within the wider context of the council. So there's significant expenditure in year forecast around care placement stability, and that's just over 600,000 as an estimate for the financial year. That includes costs incurred in maintaining placement stability, and that's across both looked after children, care leaving children, young care leavers, and also children with disabilities. We have a delay in step down in placement moves as a result of maintaining that placement stability. We've been supporting looked after children with IT equipment through the virtual school. And there's been additional operational costs for disabled children, short breaks and residential services. So that's the largest proportion of the forecast spend as a direct response of the COVID emergency. We also have some delay to the medium-term financial strategy due to the redirected management capacity. Those efficiencies are now progressing. In terms of income loss, Children's Services doesn't generate a lot of external income, but we have potential disruption to services at the Lillahusset Professional Development Centre due to the restrictions on activities, and we expect some loss in income from our traded offer to schools. In terms of the key worker service provision for key working children and vulnerable children during the early period of the emergency and through the Easter and summer school breaks, we have some additional expenditure in relation to ensuring that provision was in place. And we have some additional costs around the integrated education response and the coordination of activity between the local authority and schools in the borough. And that would be all schools in the borough, not just maintained schools. Moving on, what has the position been with schools? So schools have experienced cost pressures. Principally, they have had to incur additional deep cleaning and more frequent cleaning. They have had equipment and facilities adaptations in order to facilitate the accommodation of key worker and vulnerable children, and also the wider return to school. Additionally, they had to find resources for additional school meal costs in advance of the government's voucher scheme going live in the summer term. And they have suffered some loss of commercial income and revenue generating activities. So schools let their premises, for example, and our schools are quite innovative in terms of generating additional income to supplement their educational activities. So there has been specific funding for schools through the Department of Education, and schools have been able to apply directly to the Department of Education for funding to cover free school meals, the cost directly incurred prior to the scheme, those additional equipment, cleaning and adaptations, and they're able to apply for other specific costs by application. And where schools have done that, the Department of Education are considering those applications and will respond in due course. Unfortunately, schools are not able to claim from the DfE for lost income. They have to consume those additional costs. There, obviously, I've dropped off the bottom of this slide, but in addition to that, there is also the additional grant funding being made available to schools by government for pupil catch-up. And that is a very whistle-stop tour of costs and COVID-related costs and funding in the children's services and education area as of today.
Tony, thank you. Do any committee members have any quick questions? If not, then do members approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of July as an accurate record?
Agreed.
Any objections? Oh, we have Nandini.
No, I think under SEND and disabilities, I think there was a line which said the council held meetings with parents, 130 meetings. I think that was Parents Active held those meetings in partnership with the council. Yeah, it was under SEND and disabilities. I don't have it in front of me, but I can send you an email later if you wish.
Please do.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, everybody. That's the minutes approved. I'm now moving on to item number 4. Public participation. There are no public questions received. So item number 5, the formation of the Gangs, Violence and Exploitation Unit. Can I ask Matthew Hooper to introduce this item?
Thank you, Chair. I am Matthew Hooper, as has been said. I am the Chief Officer for Safer Neighbourhoods and Regulatory Services with the Council. Myself and Gideon Springer are here to introduce this paper, and Gideon has a short presentation to introduce it and lead into the discussion. By way of introduction from me, I think what can't be disputed in terms of crime is that over the last 18 months or so, Hammersmith and Fulham has seen an increase in serious youth violence. A lot of that, but not all, but much of it has been attributed to the presence of gangs in the borough and gang activity in the borough. And one of the characterising features of gang-related activity across London and the country is actually the introduction of effectively profit and business as a driver for gang activity, rather than the desire to be in control of a particular geographic area. So I think sort of 5 or 6 years ago, when we were talking about organised crime among young people, it was mostly about how groups of young people would associate themselves with a postcode. But now things have moved on. It's become a more complex issue to tackle, because we're now talking about young people that operate in groups, and some of those groups have business associations with other groups, and it becomes harder to unpick. So I think that's important to say about the nature of gang-related offending in London, but also in Hammersmith and Fulham, and the way in which gang-related activity is now about mostly about the selling of drugs, and the way that the business models have emerged in relation to things like county lines, where groups of young people organise drug markets outside of London and take control of drug markets outside of London in the counties, as we say, hence the name county lines, and the danger that that puts them in, and also the way that that change in the gangs landscape keys into the contextual safeguarding discussion that we've been having for the last few years, because the risks aren't, as I say, as simple as perhaps they used to be. So in June 2020, there was a decision to create the gangs unit in Hammersmith and Fulham. That gangs unit, the basic structure of it is that there are 4 gangs workers to work with young people. There are 4 antisocial behaviour coordinators who will deal with the local authority enforcement side of gangs work. There is an analytical capacity, there is a research capacity, and there is a team of police officers. This will be covered in the presentation in just a moment, so I won't go into that in detail. But I think what has also been seen is during the lockdown there has been a significant reduction in crime. And that is something that can't be disputed. But what we have observed is that in actual fact, the offences that relate to drug dealing haven't decreased as much, and there are clearly still some issues bubbling under the surface, despite the reduction in crime over the lockdown period. So with that, a brief introduction, there is more detail. I will hand over chair, if I may, to Gideon Springer to give the presentation.
You're on mute.
Yeah, I've heard that a few times this year. So, Gideon Springer, I'm the strategic lead for Safer Streets. I'm just going to share with you a PowerPoint to assist me in this presentation. If I can do this properly. Right, can you see that PowerPoint? Is it visible?
I can see a picture of your face. Oh, there it is.
Is the PowerPoint up yet?
It is up.
It
yes.
is.
Okay, good. Right. So this is a presentation in relation to the London Borough of Hammersmith Gangs Violence and Exploitation Unit. Our number one priority in Hammersmith Fulham is to keep people safe, and our residents need to know that we're doing everything in our power to prevent their children and young people being victimised and exploited by those involved in organised crime. In addition to the very real harms caused by gang activity, fear of crime and gangs is pervasive and something which must be tackled. We'll be tough on gangs, but as a compassionate council, we'll also be tough on the causes of gangs, which means addressing the underlying issues. The leader of the council was instrumental in developing this groundbreaking agreement between the council and the Metropolitan Police. Housing the Fulham Council will fund police officers to work closely with specialist council staff to bring the full weight of criminal legislation to bear on gangs and gang leaders operating in the borough, whilst at the same time delivering greater initiatives to engage with and divert vulnerable young people away from gangs of violence and exploitation. This new dedicated unit will consist of 11 LBHF employees and 6 Metropolitan Police officers. That's a total of 17 full-time equivalent posts. And the total annual cost of the unit is £983,000. The GVEU, as we're calling it, will lead a strategic portfolio of work to deliver Hammersmith and Fulham's approach to supporting young people out of gangs, violence and exploitation. This is the basic structure of the gangs team. As you can see, it sits under the head of community safety, and there is the gangs, violence and exploitation manager, who has 4 gangs workers working alongside them and 4 antisocial behaviour workers to facilitate additional work to reduce violence amongst young people. We also, as Matthew said, have a researcher and an analyst to perform those functions as well. And the important thing is the addition of the police officers. There are 6 police officers which will work alongside the gangs team. 2 of those will focus on working with the youth offending team, and 4 will work with the gangs violence team. They'll be remotely managed by a sergeant from the Metropolitan Police, but will, on a day-to-day basis, be based in the council building with our team. By way of trying to explain this, I've developed a case study. This will explain how the team is supposed to work. So, a young person will be referred to the GVEU by the Yacht, Family Assist Police or another agency, for example, through involvement in antisocial behaviour. The aim is to intervene early to prevent them from getting entrenched in the lifestyle. A GVEU worker will meet with a young person to identify the underlying issues leading them into the lifestyle, work with statutory and non-statutory agencies to provide a wraparound support to keep them in education, focus on what they want to do in the future, and mentor them through this process. An example is boy X is a 15-year-old arrested by police for minor assault. The GVEU manager liaises with police and the exploitation lead in children's services daily to identify young people who are vulnerable. X is referred to the GVEU by police as a case against X is dropped. X is believed to be associated with known gang members. Checks are made with children's services to show he's not known to them. A GVEU worker will make contact with X on release from police custody. A GVEU worker will be allocated to the case and meet with the family and X to discuss how to support him to prevent further offences. X is keen on football but has no real focus. The GVEU will work with the QPR charity to get him signed up to their programme. The QPR will lead on supporting X with a GVEU networker as a mentor and link to other agencies. The analyst and researcher will work with police to identify the gangs operating in the borough, mapping existing and emerging cohorts and produce profiles. They will share this information with partners to target those exploiting young people and lead on performance management and identifying disproportionality in the criminal justice process. Police officers within the GVEU will support the workers and link with proactive teams to target those exploiting young people. The GVEU worker will act as coordinators for referral to statutory and non-statutory intervention, such as education, substance misuse, domestic and abuse teams. The antisocial behaviour coordinators will lead on enforcement. This can be as little as antisocial behaviour contracts to the new serious violence crime reduction orders. To reduce the number of, the key performance measures and key performance indicators that will be applied to the team are to reduce the number of violent crimes committed by young people, to reduce the number of serious injuries caused by youth violence, and to reduce the number of robberies and drug-related offences committed by young people. And the qualitative measures that we'll be looking for is to identify, disrupt and enforce against specific gangs that operate in Hammersmith and Fulham, to identify and respond to young people associated with gangs, to provide safe routes out of gang association, to identify and respond to the needs of females associated with youth violence, to establish and maintain a longer-term sustainable framework based on the early intervention, disruption and prevention to ensure that young people involved in low-level criminality are successfully diverted from serious crime, and to provide support from victims. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Gideon. Okay, did someone want to say something? Are you still talking, Gideon?
No, I finished. I'm just trying to end the slideshow.
Thank you very much indeed. Do we have any questions or comments from our committee members?
Sharon, if I can.
Carry on.
Chair, if I can. Thank you very much for that presentation. Hello?
Just someone's speaking though.
Yeah, Eleanor, somebody else is speaking at the moment. I will come to you shortly.
Right. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Springer, for that presentation. The committee, last time we looked at this is actually less than 2 years ago. We looked at this in November 2018. I'm looking at the minutes of the an item where we had a meeting not just involving the committee but also representatives of the community. We had a special meeting. I think it seems to remember it was in the small hall. Well, the first thing was that at the time we were actually told that the borough was ranked fairly low for serious youth violence, and the percentage rise was the lowest in London. And we went through the various gangs that were active in the borough, and we had a description of some of those. And then we looked at the knife crime action plan, and the committee made I think 10 recommendations as a result of that meeting. Well, the first thing is what has really changed? I mean, we were given a much less stark picture 2 years ago. Has it really changed that much in 2 years?
Well, I believe it has, and the situation is such that whilst I wasn't present at that meeting, I've got some sort of historic knowledge of the borough in terms of crime. Matt may want to answer this question because he may have more detail in relation to that. So I'll just see if Matt's to respond to that.
Matt, carry on.
Yeah, thank you. So I think Councillor Loveday, the timing is an interesting one, because I joined the council in April 2019, And at the point I joined the council, there had been the murder of a young man, and that, although it's easy to oversimplify these things, that led to a number of other incidents. And in fact, within the space of the next 6 months, there were 3 young men murdered in the borough. And as ever, when one group or gang fatally attacks another group or gang, there are a lot of tit-for-tat incidences that spark from that. And this is what happened in this case. So looking at the intelligence that we've seen and the incidents that in many occasions are quite public, we felt that there was a need to address the problem immediately rather than let it escalate any further, hence the creation. So I suppose the quick answer to the question is that I realised 2 years ago may not seem that long, but a lot has changed and there have been some significant incidents in that time.
Okay. The second thing I wanted to ask was, I'm not going to take you through all of the recommendations, but reading the what was said at the time, there was quite a lot talked about counselling, involvement of community organisations, schools, and so on. And some of it sounds remarkably similar to the case study that you were giving us about counselling of one individual. You're giving us an example of counselling of one individual young person. What is it that the 11 full-time equivalents are actually going to be doing differently from what was being done before?
Right, I think it's, sorry, I'll answer that. It's an issue of capacity. We have looked at the work that's been done by the youth offending team in the borough, and they've been very successful in managing certain aspects of youth violence in the borough. But over the last couple of years, they have had some challenges in terms of the number of young people that are repeat offenders and the number of young people that are incarcerated as a result of crime. And in terms of this borough, Hammersmith and Fulham is one of the has one of the highest proportions of young people. And what we aim to do is to intervene with those individuals and try to turn that around. And we have the capacity with the additional staff to spend more time on a one-to-one basis with those individuals and look at them in a more holistic way, in a trauma-informed way, to try to address some of the issues impacting on them. But also at the same time, we can intervene before those individuals that are coming through the process get involved with the youth offending team at a very early stage, even when they're just 11 or 12 years old, to do what we know works by spending that time, that effort, and providing that support for those young people. So it's a two-pronged attack on this problem from both ends, trying to have a different outcome with the additional resources that are available to us.
But it's basically doing what was best practice, what we were doing before, but with more people. Is that right?
Shortly, yes, and additional work as well.
Right. So the additional work, I mean, we've still got the young offenders service and a head of young offenders service. Are the new people from on this initiative, they're not being effectively taken over from the youth offender service? This is completely new provision, is that right?
Yes, it's a completely new provision which will work alongside the youth offender service and other services in the council. As we find that the youth offender service is quite busy, and with the serious nature of the offences that we're dealing with, it's important that we do have additional resource to address those issues.
So you can assure me that this isn't, it's not as though we're transferring people who are already within the council to do this job. These are actually new posts that we're recruiting. Is that right?
They are new posts indeed, yes.
Yeah.
And if I may
where
as well,
is the? Sorry,
Councillor, I was just going to add. We're keen to point out that the 11 posts that we are adding are not about, we're not rolling existing jobs into those. It's not a savings exercise. They will be doing additional work over and above the core statutory duty of the youth offending team. I think we need to remember that the job of the youth offending team is at its core to ensure that young offenders are engaged for a set period of time in constructively. That doesn't always mean that we're able to engage them about what's going on with the offending landscape, the youth offending, the gangs landscape in the borough, because part of the function of the team will be to give us an intelligence picture we just don't have at the moment. And if I'm honest, neither do the police, because of their level of resource as well. Because by talking to the young people, working collaboratively with the police, we can get a much better understanding of what is going on and therefore what we need to do to tackle it. I should just add as well, apologies, we intended to have the detective inspector in charge of the gangs unit here. There's been a personnel changeover in the police. The current detective inspector is brand new to the borough and wasn't able to attend this meeting, so apologies for that.
All right. Well, the final question is, if this is completely new resource, and we've heard already that there are finances are particularly tight at the moment, where's the money actually coming from for this, for the council's component of the gangs unit, the new gangs unit? So
the funding for the team, and the details are set out in the report. There is an aggregation of Section 106 contributions which are for the purpose of community safety, and the entirety of the gangs unit is funded out of that community safety Section 106 allocation. All right,
sorry, there was one other question. From the point of view of the committee, I think we'd be interested to know what the metrics are for success here. What do you consider to be progress? Have you got any benchmarks that you're hoping to achieve to measure that?
I think the main metrics are, we split them up in the presentation, and they're also in the report as well, around statistical, what we can measure in terms of crime, and there are three main ones there in the report, and then there are qualitative objectives as well. So that's what we're working to at the moment. Hopefully it's spelled out clearly enough in the report.
Sorry, I didn't see where I saw that there's a lot of statistics in there, but I didn't see any benchmarks for what you consider to be and the leader must have set you some saying, right, you have to achieve X, Y, and Z. I didn't see that in the report. Is that or is it just you're going to get down and get working and then work out what the what would constitute success?
No, they are in the report. So
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Let me just go through them briefly. So there's the three main key performance indicators, which are to reduce the number of violent crimes committed by young people, to reduce the number and seriousness of injuries caused by youth violence, and to reduce the number of robberies and drug-related offences committed by young people. They're the three core sort of numerical objectives, and then the qualitative measures are around identify disrupting and enforcing against specific gangs, identifying and responding to young people associated with gangs, so on the edges, the periphery of gang-related offending, to provide safe routes out of gang association, to identify and respond to the needs of females associated with youth violence and gangs, to establish and maintain a longer-term sustainable framework based on early intervention, disruption and prevention, to make sure we divert young people away from more serious offending, and then to provide support for victims.
Sorry, could you take me to where that is in the report? I missed that.
It's so it's on page 11 in the pack. Under item 3.
Yes, I appreciate that, but it's not a key performance indicator to reduce the number of violent crimes. You need to actually know what the number of violent crimes is to be reduced to. If you reduce it by 1, then that's a performance indicator. That's success. Don't you have any targets with specific numbers attached to it?
Not at the moment, no. But I think
No.
as you set up a unit, we know what the stats are. We have full access to the police data. We understand what the figures are. I think once we are up and running, I'll just point out that the unit has only been running since the 14th of September. Then we will have a better idea of what is realistic. I think it's reasonable so far for us to have pointed out what we hope to make meaningful reductions on.
Okay, Mark.
Thank you.
There are other people waiting.
Yes, absolutely.
Eleanor?
Andrew, could you close the door for me?
Do you have your questions? Do you have a question?
Yes. I just wanted to say it must be very difficult to work with these people. Have been very difficult to work with these young people during the pandemic, particularly because they were loose because of not being at college or school or anything, and not being able to get into any employment program. And obviously, the less they're on the streets, the better. Has this made more of a difference? I just want to ask whether this has made more of a difference.
Yeah, so in terms of the information we're receiving, yes, bearing in mind, as I say, we've only been operating for a couple of weeks. Police statistics show that certain types of crimes have been increased significantly during the pandemic, but we're also aware that our colleagues in community safe and children's services and the yacht have been changing their model of operation with young people because of the pandemic.
Thank you, Gideon. Matthew Hooper, is there anything else you wanted to add?
Only, Chair, only really that, a key to our success here is two things really. Firstly, that, we are going to be working incredibly closely with the Metropolitan Police on this. So effectively what the Met have agreed to do because of our negotiations with them is place their gangs unit, the Metropolitan Police gangs unit, with all of their intelligence and all of their expertise into a council office with a larger team of council officers to work really productively and directly with these young people. So we're really excited about the difference that can bring. It's a first for the borough. It's a real meaningful investment. And, what we're really keen to get right, it's critical that we get it right, is that we provide a meaningful additional responsibility to work with these young people and mesh well into the safeguarding processes. That's really key. So what we're doing at the moment is making sure that what we do is not interrupt or get in the way of the statutory responsibilities of children's social care and the police, and that actually we are adding value to the whole process and better safeguarding those young people. So I just wanted to make those 2 points around the really pioneering work with the police and making sure that we've got a good partnership to deliver these improvements.
Thank you, Matthew. Bev, you have your hand up. Bev Sharp.
Hello, yes, I'm Bev Sharp. I'm the Assistant Director for Family Services. I'm responsible for the YOS, Youth Offending Service. So I just wanted to reiterate really that we've worked really closely with Gideon and with Matt around what the offer will be to the young people, both those that are already involved with the YOS in terms of their statutory orders, but also that preventative work that both Gideon and Matt have referred to. So I think we're very positive about the impact that this new unit is going to have on young people. So we know that the earlier that we can intervene with young people, the better the potential outcome for them, for their future, obviously. So, very, very positive about it. And in terms of Ms. Allen's question, in terms of working with young people during COVID, our youth offending service have maintained very frequent contact through a number of channels. So they have been doing some visiting, so home visiting to young people that are involved with YOS, but also engagement through Zoom, WhatsApp, all the different media. So we've made sure that we've really been engaged with young people.
Do we have any other questions? Right, Councillor Sadiq.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the comprehensive presentations this evening. Can I ask you, is that more cost-effective or maybe productive if the unit will work the cross-borough, or do they have any plan? I know this is the major problem at the moment in London, or it is within the borough. You said you are working closely with the police, and I know the police is working cross-borough, tri-borough system. So how you have a plan like to tackle this in future, or you maybe more cost-effective, or any future plan, or more productive, or this at the moment will work within the borough?
We'll certainly work within the borough. However, as can be seen by many of the incidents that occur with young people, they can occur anywhere in London. And we're very keen to work with the police colleagues across the BCU as it is now. And we recognise that working with colleagues particularly in Kensington, Chelsea and Westminster, but also colleagues in Ealing, will assist us, and we do have links already with those other teams to look at issues that are impacting on our vulnerable children, because they don't operate within borough boundaries. Gangs and violence and exploitation happen across London, and as Matt was saying earlier, throughout the home counties. So we will be, whilst we are a borough-based unit, to be effective, we will have to link in with and work very closely with our colleagues in surrounding boroughs.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for your thoughts.
Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. And Chair, can I just say I've just had apologies from Councillor Richardson.
I got that message. I'm going to pick that up in the break.
Good, brilliant.
Okay.
Thank you. I am so pleased that this new unit's been set up to improve capacity and strengthen our capabilities. So I think as a council, it's our duty to safeguard our young people from getting swept up in a life of violent crime. And we absolutely need to try our hardest to protect our young people, and I cannot think of a better use for these funds. I think obviously, so I was in a policing meeting earlier today, and I think obviously with 20,000 fewer police on the streets as a direct result of cuts, an uptick in violent crime feels like it was almost inevitable. So I'm so pleased that we are taking the initiative and setting this up. Is there a way for communities to get involved to support this unit, and is there anything that we can do as ward councillors to assist with this as well?
There is indeed. Part of the role of the Gangs Violence Exploitation Unit will be to work with communities to strengthen their capability to help the young people within their midst. There's also already a number of voluntary organisations that work in this area, and there are non-statutory organisations, and we intend to develop those relationships to work with them so that we increase the offer that there is out there for young people, and there are a number of people there are to support them. We're very keen to get into mentoring and coaching for them and look at employment and other things. So it is a really holistic approach to these young people who are victims of crime, to look at how we can improve their lives so that they've got an option other than gangs, and they can see that those options are available. And there are a lot of people out there, we've seen with the sort of the CAN approach throughout the council, there are a lot of people in the community willing to put their time and effort into improving their environment. So we'll look to tap into those individuals to provide mentoring and support schemes for the young people that we identify.
Thank you very much, Gideon. Alex, can you put your hand down unless you've got another question? Do we have any other committee members who want to ask a question of Matthew? Yes, Councillor Cohane.
Thank you, Chair. Not a question as such. I just wanted to follow on from what Councillor Sanderson said, and it goes without saying how much support we all have behind this, and particularly to thank the Metropolitan Police for their support in doing this as well. This is, as far as I'm aware anyway, completely unique amongst any relationship between a borough and police in London. And I think it shows their commitment as much as ours to protecting young people in this borough. The fact that they've put this resource into the unit to try and make a fundamental difference to our young people's lives. So I'm sure there's a lot of work left to go and ahead, and obviously it's only been up and running for a matter of days. But I think it's a really good thing. Proud of everyone's efforts, and thank you to Matthew and Gideon for all the work they've put into this as well, getting it up off the ground, and the Metropolitan Police, and hopefully good news lays ahead.
Thank you very much, Councillor Colhane, and you, Councillor Sanderson. Councillor Fenimore, I see you'd like to comment or ask a question. Are you ready? No?
Try that. That's better. I did it again. I forgot the mute. I just firstly like to say hello to the committee. I used to sit on the committee many moons ago, and I'm particularly delighted to see Eleanor joining this evening. But I would just like to add some points to the excellent presentation. Very clear what the process is and what our approach is. But I would just like to say Gideon did mention very gently that he has some experience of this. I would just like to elaborate on what that experience is. He used to be our borough commander, Hammersmith and Fulham borough commander. So I am hugely grateful to him. I'm absolutely hugely grateful to Matt and Bev Sharp for everybody coming. This didn't happen overnight. I'm sure you can appreciate sometimes these things take a long time. But the fundamental issue for me is a really close working relationship with the police on this. What we're dealing with at the moment is serious organised crime. Gangs have changed so dramatically in a very short space of time, and what we're looking at is a business of drugs. And very often what young people are faced with is very little choice at all whenever it comes to them to do anything other than be coerced and groomed into gangs. And that is absolutely unacceptable, inappropriate, and not on my watch is basically, I think, the process of what we're doing. Steve and I have worked very closely on this piece of work. For anybody, and I'm afraid I've had the experience 3 times in the last sort of 18 months, sitting across the table. Sorry, my camera's not on. I do apologise. Sitting across the table from siblings, mothers, fathers, talking about what had just happened to their child had been murdered. I can assure you is a humbling experience, to say the very least. But it is also an experience, frankly, I never want to go through again, and I certainly don't want to see any other family impacted on gang crime in the way that has happened in recent years. This is a national problem. This is a London problem, and this is a Hammersmith and Fulham problem. And Hammersmith and Fulham will not stand by and let any more young people get exploited into gangs. So the whole purpose of this particular report is for us to work very closely with police. There is no way that we can deliver what we need to deliver without an incredibly close working relationship with the police. And I'm hugely grateful for them for understanding our passion and our commitment to ensure that young people are safe in the borough. But also, I think, not just young people, residents can see and do see on a regular basis young people particularly involved in drug dealing, which not only makes it extremely frightening for people, but also that they know that there is an issue that we absolutely must do something about. And that is why we are introducing our U unit. And as Matt said, this is not this is an additional resource. The police numbers have been cut so absolutely dramatically over years, and I think there is some element to say that you can look at how many people are being prosecuted or how many people are being taken to justice for their crimes is very, very difficult. And we need to be helping the police, and they need to be helping us to do everything that we can to ensure that our young people are safe. I say that, and I mean it absolutely from the bottom of my heart. I spent 12 years volunteering for Youth Offending Service before I became a councillor, and I am absolutely passionate about this particular topic, no question. But I'm also passionate and absolutely committed to ensuring that we bring those people who are coercing and recruiting young people into gangs. We are going after those people who are doing the exploitation, and we need to be absolutely committed to both aspects of that piece of work. Not only making sure that young people are safe and that if they are getting involved in criminal activity, we do everything we can to divert them to ensure that they don't go down that route, but equally young people who are already involved in gangs need our support and they need routes out of that crime. But I am absolutely as committed to go after those gang leaders as I am anything else. This is unacceptable, outrageous in the 21st century that so many young people are finding themselves being coerced into gangs, and it's just time. It is absolutely over time. I mean, it should have happened 10 years ago. But what we've done and what we've managed to do is work very, very collaboratively with the police to say, here's the problem, how can we fix and solve this together? It's a huge investment, and absolutely a paramount investment. If we can't keep our young people safe, what are we here for? And that is my focus and my absolute passion and commitment to make sure that we do everything we can to stop young people getting involved in crimes. The young boy Ayub who was stabbed on North End Road, when I sat down with her mother, who told me in very graphic detail what had happened to her son up until the point of his murder, would absolutely make your toes curled, and I will not be sharing that at this meeting. But it's fundamental to everything that we do as a local authority to ensure that young people are kept safe and our residents are safe as well. So I think that's probably all I wanted to say. I'm very happy to take any questions if anybody wants to ask me any questions. But that's the value system, that's the policy, and that's the approach we will take to ensure that young people are kept safe and those people who are exploiting them are brought to justice.
Well, can I just say thank you to the Deputy Leader of Hammersmith and Fulham for the passion shown on this subject matter.
It matters. It really matters to me. It matters to me.
It does.
More than
it matters to all of us.
Almost anything else. I hate to say that. It absolutely does.
Okay, we have another question from Councillor Sadiq and also Councillor Colhane. Councillor Sadiq? No?
Me? Not from me.
Not from you. And not from you, Councillor Colhane?
No, apologies. I left my hand up, Chair. Forgive me.
That's fine. That's lovely. Do we have any other questions from committee members?
Chair, can I quickly ask a question?
Yes, please do.
This is Nandini Ganesh, and I just want to ask, I mean, a year or two ago, Met Police regularly used to come to our organization, Hammersmith and Fulham MENCAP, and actually talk to vulnerable, disabled residents, a part of Hammersmith and Fulham MENCAP, to say that they've introduced a safer, I have forgotten the exact term, but I think it's something like safe play scheme or something in King Street, where if anybody felt threatened, they could walk into shops, and shops used to sign up to those schemes. So if you're a person with a hidden disability and you feel threatened by a gang or anybody like that, you could walk into these shops who were signed up to these schemes and knew how to help them. Are you aware of this, and are you making use of that scheme still? And the people with disabilities used to be given lanyards and stuff which they could show to these shop owners to say, I'm feeling threatened, can you help me? Are you aware of this, and is it something you could, if you're not, could you revisit it?
Alice, yes, I'm very much aware of the scheme. It's been in for some time. It may well be that it's fallen into disuse in the borough. However, as part of our approach to gang violence exploitation, we will speak to our police colleagues and ensure that they review that and refresh it if it's still something that is available. And if not, we can still look to shops and other partners to continue the scheme and support those vulnerable people in the borough. But it's certainly something I'll take a look at on their behalf.
Thank you, Gideon. Councillor Fenimore, did you want to say something? No. Okay. Do we have anyone else?
If I may, Sharon, sorry to interrupt. If I may, one of the crucial points, and just adding to Nandini's comment, one of the crucial points is being able to work with communities and third sector organisations in relation to concerns that anybody's facing about a particular young person in the borough. We need people to be able to refer in, and that will be part of the process, is making sure that if we have referrals coming in, that they are addressed. And those referrals don't necessarily need to come from statutory services. What we want to do is make sure that anybody who's concerned about a young person getting involved in crime can report into us to make sure that they are being supported and that we do everything we can to keep that. So thank you, Nandini, for the question. It's absolutely pertinent, and we will be doing as much working alongside community organisations, third sector, to be able to, for them to be able to refer in.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Fenimore. If we don't have any other questions, I'd like to make some points. First of all, can we share a copy of the GVEU PowerPoint presentation? So when I say share, can you share it with us? Or do you have you given that to us already?
I forward it to David, who has it.
That's okay. So apologies then. That's lovely.
You can forward it to people then.
That will go out. That's okay. Given that there were recommendations in 2018, as Mark has pointed out, I mean, I wasn't chair at the time. I think what I would like to do would be to discuss those recommendations with the new heads of the team, that's you, Gideon, and you, Matt, at a later date, so that we can just kind of do a report back on a regular basis with the committee and with the public on how we're doing with this new gangs unit. Okay. Right. I think that's my points.
Chair, could I don't know whether you'd agree or whether the committee would agree. I'm also slightly concerned about the slightly woolly nature of the success metrics at the moment. I mean, we can't tell, nobody can tell whether the unit has succeeded or failed unless there are actually some numbers attached to those various targets that they've been set.
Mark, I think you've made your point avidly on more than one occasion. We do have a matrix, and I think that in my discussions that I'm proposing to have with both Gideon and Matthew, I will discuss those issues along with the recommendations, because clearly that's part of the recommendations now. It just are part of the newer recommendations as opposed to the ones that existed in 2018. Is that okay? Well, I'm asking you, Gideon and Matthew.
Yep, that's fine. Thank you.
That's lovely. Fine. And can I also give you notice now that this item will clearly be back on the agenda sooner rather than later, okay? Just so that we can keep abreast. Okay, everyone? That's lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Can we now move on to the next item? Oh, sorry, my apologies. I have had word from Councillor Richardson. She gives her apologies for this evening. And welcome to you, Matt Jenkins. You have joined us. Okay, that's lovely. Moving on now to item number 6, update on the SCIDS study. Can I ask Dr. Nicola Lang to introduce this item?
Oh, hello, Chair. Hi, my name's Nikki Lang. I'm the Director of Public Health. Thank you for welcoming me. So this is a report about a study that 5 of our Hammersmith and Fulham primary schools took part in. The SCID study, schools for primaries were selected if they had more than 3/4 of children of Black and minority ethnic origin, as they are often underrepresented in research. So I've put a bit of background from the national study. So 138 schools in England took part. There were two different ways that you could take part. Some of the schools had weekly swabs in their nose, and 47 of the schools had a swab and a blood test to check for antibody at the beginning and the end of the summer term, with a repeat in this term. And that's the study that our schools took part in. So as you can see, there were 5 schools. They were very enthusiastic and extremely well organized, that we've listed in the paper. All the primary schools in Hammersmith and Fulham at that time had negative swab results. There was a slight lag in antibody test results, but that was a national issue due to laboratory delays. So I've also put a segment there from the actual study. I think the main take-home message was that by taking part in this study in Hammersmith and Fulham, we contributed to the national evidence, which informed the thinking of the Chief Medical Officer. You may have seen some of the press releases that came out in August that described that schools were, low-risk settings. Some of the interesting sections can be seen in paragraph 6, where you see that 2/3 of the outbreaks were actually involving staff transmitting to other people. So we think that children are less infectious, especially children who are under 10. And that's informed a lot of the national thinking around the safety and the importance of getting children back to school. So the take-home interpretation is that infections and outbreaks were uncommon in educational settings. I think the caveat to look at now is that the study as well highlighted that school outbreaks and school transmission reflect what's happening in the community. So schools are not necessarily thought to be the drivers of community outcomes, but they're like a mirror image. And a lot of the work that I've been doing in the last 2 weeks, we are certainly getting a lot of queries coming in from schools around need for testing. I think the thing that's been, the other thing that's been really good is that we've now been offered places for our secondary school on what they call Skids Plus, and 2 of our secondary schools have already signed up, which is great, and one of them is already working hard to sign up teachers and children. The final point is that this national work and participating in this kind of really exciting research informed our back to school approach in Hammersmith and Fulham. And we've got a click link where we had different types of professionals encouraging children to come back to school. Amongst them, Dr. Liz Whitaker, who's a specialist in children's infectious disease at St. Mary's, who's also been helping us a lot with our procedures around special schools and aerosol generating procedures, what we call when you suck things like suctioning, where you're generating a fine spray which can transmit infection. So I'm really happy to take any questions, but I think the main thing now is that we're gearing up for Skids Plus.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Nikki. Do we have any questions from committee members or comments? No. Oh, yes, we do.
Well, okay. Sorry. Yeah.
That's okay. Councillor Culhane.
Chair, I'm happy to let members of the committee go first.
Okay. Mark?
Yeah, the first thing I wanted to say is to thank Nicola Lang for the excellent work that's being done over the last few months. I know that your equivalent in Wiltshire actually had a BBC series dedicated to her, but perhaps that's not going to happen in your case. But nevertheless, thank you for everything you've done. Can I just check on paragraph 6? What I wasn't clear about is the 67 confirmed cases. That was nationwide, was it?
Yes.
No, it's not in the borough schools. Do we know the figures for the borough schools that participated?
So all our borough schools had no positive swabs when they did the studies in June and July. Obviously, that's changed now. But yeah, at the time of the studies for Skids, none of our schools had a positive swab. Sorry, yes, I should have said paragraph 6 is lifted out of the national study, so it's all
Yeah.
within those quotation marks.
Okay. Well, that's obviously good news.
Yeah.
It is indeed.
And again, it's a reflection of the national. So we had low numbers in those months. So our schools were a mirror image of that. Now we've got, you know, epidemic levels. So we expect numbers in schools as they are happening.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Culhane? Mark, do you want to put your hand down?
Thank you, Chair. If you don't mind, I just want to start off by particularly thanking Nikki and all of the team in public health, who throughout the pandemic have been a huge friend of all of our schools throughout the borough. It's often forgotten most of our schools stayed open throughout the pandemic in order to enable key workers to stay on the front line and to allow priority children to remain getting an education. And obviously our schools absolutely showed their commitment to all of the families in the borough when they continued to do that, but also Nikki and her team showed their commitment to our schools, to our teachers and to our families and young people in all of their support that they've given them. And again in sort of June, when there was the botched reopening of primary schools and obviously the lead up to September, where touch wood things seem to have gone quite smoothly so far, in large parts thanks to the help that Nikki and her team have provided, and also a thank you particularly to the 5 schools who've taken part in this study. In normal times, quote unquote, schools have enough on their plate, let alone in a pandemic of this size and nature. But to find the time and the energy and the effort to play a big role in trying to understand and tackle this virus and how it affects our families, they're a great credit to this borough, and I'm sure I speak for everyone on this call when we thank them for all the work they've done.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Culhane. You have said most of what I would have liked to have said. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, again, just to echo Councillor Culhane, thank you so much to everyone who's worked so hard to pull all of this together. It's been really amazing, quite humbling to see how many people have worked so hard throughout the summer and longer to make sure that our children and our key workers can get the education that they need, so we can have more people out on the front line. I just have one very quick question, and it's about this testing. Are you anticipating a lag in test results in October as a result of national shortages of testing?
No, because they've got a new system. So when we did it for the summer skid study, everything was paper-based. So as Councillor Culhane said, I mean, our schools were complimented on how, you know, they were running a really tight ship and how welcoming they were, you know, as we would expect, because our schools are really marvelous. So they had a lot of paper-based signing up. If people had difficult handwriting, it slowed the whole system up. It's now all digital, I've been promised. So I've been told it's going to run like a well-oiled machine. I hope.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Matt, did you want to ask a question?
Please, if you don't mind. I'm sorry, I don't know how to do it via the chat thing. Firstly, I apologise. I'm not entirely sure where this question would be, whether this is the correct point to ask this question, but it's something that has been raised to me from a number of schools, and that is regarding current sort of developments with PPE. Is there any way that we can provide PPE to schools, i.e. specifically masks for disadvantaged students, because there currently isn't a budget for that, with it's coming out of existing school budgets? Is there anything that can be done at a borough level to support schools in the borough with providing masks where that's necessary?
So there isn't a need for children themselves to wear PPE in schools, unless it's in specific circumstances, like in secondaries when they're walking in crowded areas. The guidance is for face coverings. There was a starter pack of PPE provided, you know, back in March, April and May to all schools so that they were able to have that. But it's probably a question maybe for education colleagues, as that's more about sort of provisions and budgets. But I know that education colleagues have been really, really supportive of all the schools, and we have a lot of, I join a lot of head teacher meetings, so I would hope that they would have raised that with me if it's a problem. But if it is, then please do tell Jan Parnell.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Mandy, do you want to respond to that?
I could add a little to Nikki's response.
Please.
Yes. I'm sorry, I should put my video on. Sorry. I'm Mandy Lawson. I'm the Assistant Director for Education and Disabilities. So just to add to what Nikki said, actually, we have been working very, very closely with the schools from the beginning of the pandemic. With Nikki's support, we pulled together some very comprehensive guidance for schools in relation to PPE and some very good guidance in relation to managing the risks in relation to COVID. And as Nikki says, we're still learning, but we have much better information now, very much informed by the science that we're gathering locally as well as nationally. In relation to PPE, we've been working particularly with the special schools, and very definitely our special schools need an enhanced level of PPE because of the needs of the children who attend the schools. And we are working with the schools to understand which children, which circumstances they might need PPE. But to be honest, as Dr. Lang has said, that generally at the moment, the advice is not for children in mainstream school to need PPE and not for the staff to maintain PPE, because they're actually being able to maintain their social distance. But we will continue to monitor the guidance that comes down from DfE, and we'll continue to support schools. The local authority does have the facility to support schools if they need PPE and can't find it through their usual supply chains. So we have a mechanism to support with that.
Okay, question, Matthew, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things was going to be about supply chains. That really does help with that as well. Yeah, thank you very much.
That's lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Do we have any other questions in relation to item number 6, skid study? We have... No, Mandy, your hand's still up. Do you want to ask another question? No, lovely.
Sorry.
Eleanor, you have a question?
Okay. Yes. Don't touch anything. Speak up. What is it an acronym for, SKIDS?
I think it's surveillance in kids. I'm sure that Public Health England have thought of something clever, but anyway, it escapes me, but it's basically surveillance for kids. And the one for secondary schools is called SKIDS Plus. I had raised my hand just to say that I know we get used to education, just being really, really good in this borough. And again, Public Health England really did commend the education department. The speed with which we signed up 5 schools was probably within about 24 to 48 hours. I mean, it was breathtaking, and they knew exactly the numbers, proportions of Black and minority ethnic children, and the level of trust between education and the schools just meant we could, get straight into research mode. So we felt really well supported. So thank you.
Well, again, thank you to Public Health for being there to support our education services. Okay, any other questions? If that's not the case, thank you very much indeed, Dr. Lang. Moving on now to item number 7. Supporting young people's emotional well-being in Hammersmith and Fulham during lockdown and beyond. Can I ask Mandy Lawson to introduce the item?
Hello, I've just introduced myself, so you know who I am. So I am going to present this item with colleagues from across the sector, actually. So I'm representing Children's Joint Commissioning across Hammersmith and Fulham from within the local authority, but actually we joint commission with the CCG, the Clinical Commissioning Group. So we have Aisha here with us. Aisha, are you able to put your camera on and introduce yourself? Coming through in a minute, I think.
You're still on mute, Aisha.
Right, can you see me and hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Right. Hi, I'm Aisha Janjua. I'm Associate Director for Integration and Partnerships at Central London CCG. That's the clinical commissioning group that covers, that does the commissioning on behalf of the Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham. I'm covering this on an interim basis, so please be kind if I don't have all the details to hand, but we can follow up any queries that you have.
Thank you, Aisha. And Satwinder, who will be talking about the education offer. Satwinder, you introduce yourself.
Again, mute.
Sorry. Apologies, I pressed the button. Sorry, I'm Satwinder Saran. I'm Strategic Lead for Education and Transformation.
Thank you, Satwinder. So we have a presentation which I believe has been sent to you, so we won't go through the full detail. Can I confirm that you've had already received this? Chair.
Yes.
Yes. So give me
That
one
is
second.
yes.
It's coming up now. Have you got that?
We can see it.
Lovely.
Yep.
Okay. So we are going to tell you about the range of services that we have in Hammersmith and Fulham, which support young people in relation to their mental health needs, and the approach that has been taken to during this period, and how we will be moving forwards. So I'm just mindful that Chair, we can see you in the corner there. I might see if I can just move you across. Okay. So this is national data. And the national data we anticipate will be reflected in our local data. However, the timing has not enabled us to pull together very detailed local data. I'm not sure if Dr. Lang is still on the call actually, but we're about to go through a joint strategic needs assessment in relation to children and young people's mental health. And that will enable us to pull together a much richer set of data. But at the moment, we're reliant upon national data, but national data tells us pretty much what we thought would have happened anyway, that it is very obvious that the impact of the pandemic would have had very significant impact on young people's mental health. And I think the difference between the March data and the July data tells us a great deal. Things got worse. It was really very, very worrying for our young people. And we fully recognise that in Hammersmith and Fulham. And we're able to use our range of services to anticipate and to respond. What we have here is what probably looks to you as a fairly complicated slide. And it's complicated because actually the arena, the landscape, the provision of mental health services for children and young people in Hammersmith and Fulham is extensive and comprehensive. And if you can see, we work through the Thrive model. So this is the model of children and young people's emotional well-being, which starts from young people coping, identifying that they need some help, getting a bit more help, and then getting support with risk. And this we call our Tier 1 to Tier 4 model. And this model is provided in Hammersmith and Fulham through a number of means. And I'm going to go through in quite a bit more detail the services. And Aisha will present the blue sections, which are the NHS CCG Commission services. But as you can see, we have a landscape that is delivered across the whole sector. So at the very bottom of this slide, we have our very early intervention, our prevention, making sure that our young people stay emotionally well, making sure that we're capturing young people at that very early point of perhaps becoming a little worried, a little distressed with emerging needs. So these are the services that we have. In the very bottom, there are universal services to all intents and purposes. They're available to all children in Hammersmith and Fulham. So we have services that are provided through our community grant system. And in Hammersmith and Fulham, we still offer community grants. So we have a family support model, essentially, which is provided through UPG, MASBRA, West London Action for Children. They are available as services to all of our residents who have children. Moving up within that box, we then have our Hammersmith and Fulham Family Support Service. So our Hammersmith and Fulham's Family Support Service is our early help service, essentially commissioned by the local authority, provided by Family Support. And Family Support offer our children's centres. They offer an early help model with casework. They work with our young people, and they have developed some really innovative ways of working with young people. They have developed webinars. They've created an app that young people can put on their phone called Brain in Hand. It's an early intervention, identification of distress, and young people can carry around with them an app that enables them to answer some of their queries, motivate them to get up in the morning, motivate them to face some of their challenges. Family Support are very, very strong in this area, and we're really proud to have Family Support working with us in this area. We have our Educational Psychology Service. Satwinder will talk a little bit more about the Educational Psychology Service when we move on to education. We have our Stephen Wiltshire Centre. That is our centre that was opened 2 years ago in Hammersmith and Fulham for children and young people with SEN and disabilities. So we're working there with our children who have got special educational needs, disabilities. We have our integrated key workers who are working face to face with children and young people and their families, making sure that we're identifying and providing support. Aisha, I'll come back to you if that's okay, and I'll flow through the local authority, and then you can flow through on the CCG. So moving up to our tier 2 level, that's our early help and our more targeted support. We have a range of support in the local authority, which are our looked after children's CAMS. So we have a specialist CAMS service that works just with our children who are looked after to make sure whether they are in Hammersmith and Fulham or whether they're placed out of borough, that we make sure that their mental health needs are identified and supported. We have our Hammersmith and Fulham clinical team. Our clinical team works with children again who are looked after, or children who have a social worker, ensuring that we are providing to their mental health needs. We are working with them through our systemic family therapy model. Within all of these models, we, during COVID, were delivering some face-to-face, but we were delivering a really effective digital model. We were doing WhatsApp, we were doing Zoom, we were doing Teams. We were able to engage with a wide range of young people. And then also provided by the local authority, funded by the local authority, is our community CAMS offer. So that's provided by our Hammersmith and Fulham CAMS, but actually funded by the local authority. We have Kooth, which is a digital tool again. There is a big, strong theme of digital, and digital we have found has enabled us to deliver throughout the pandemic. But actually, we've also found that it works really very well for a wide range of our young people. And then we have our positive behaviour support team. This is a team that we were just beginning to recruit to at the beginning of the pandemic. And this is our team that will work with children and young people who've got complex behaviours, those with learning disabilities. And this team is literally just getting started, to be honest, but we did have some interim staff in place, so we were able to do some very targeted work with children and young people with autism who found lockdown very, very challenging. So we have a range of services. These were all in place pre-pandemic, and these will continue as we go through. Aisha, can I hand over to you to describe some of the CCG offers on this slide?
Great, thank you, Mandy. So starting again at the bottom, from the NHS perspective, for a number of years, Hammersmith and Fulham Mind have provided a schools-based service, recognising the importance of early intervention, especially in the different settings where young people are located. So schools being obviously a very important aspect of that. So they have been providing a service called Be Kind to Your Mind. This is psychoeducation support for around low to moderate mental health needs, and it's really about working with children and young people up to the age of 25, so quite a long, a wide age range, offering advocacy and advice around mental health support. They've got sort of 3 key programs around learning well. They do art therapy, and they've got a wellbeing advice service. And they, in traditional sort of before COVID sort of times, they would be delivering this through one-to-ones at schools assemblies, but also group work, And the aim of the service is very much around building the resilience and well-being of the pupils, improving the ability of young people to manage their own well-being, especially through transitions, also reducing stigma around mental health, helping young people understand the range of services and support they can also access. So that had been going on for a number of years, and then I'll come on to talk about the Trailblazers. So the Trailblazer is a very innovative new programme. It's funded by NHS England, so it's a national programme, and Hammersmith and Fulham were one of the first sites across the country to be successful and be awarded Trailblazer status. And it's quite similar in that it works in schools, and they're based out of schools. And in Hammersmith and Fulham, 23 schools have the Trailblazer status, and the schools that work with the mental health support teams. This service, again, is provided by Hammersmith and Fulham Mind, which allows them to really link up with the Be Kind to Your Mind programme, so that we've got a very equitable schools offer. So what that means is where the schools that don't have Trailblazers in them have access to Be Kind to Your Mind. So we're very mindful that we've got full kind of school coverage, as it were, and we're not missing out any schools. So that's really helpful service. And then going on to tier 2, we've got the transition worker, CAMS transition worker that the CCG commission. So this is actually so this worker provides support to young people aged 14 to 25 with autism and or a learning disability. So helping them transition from CAMS, children's services, to adult mental health services, helping them navigate sort of that transition, but also the complex adult services landscape. Another really vital service. Then if we move up into tier 3, which is a sort of slightly more specialist provision. So the youth offending service, we've got 2 workers here. We've got a full-time youth justice liaison and diversion worker. So they sit within the forensic directorate, and they work very closely with the youth offending service to screen and assess any young person who presents to the youth justice system. And they might offer some very short-term work, but they'll mainly signpost to other services. So we then also have a youth offending service nurse who sits within the CAMS team, but they're co-located with the council team, the youth offending service, and they work on a much longer term basis with young people who've coming through the criminal justice system, youth justice system, and they've got a lot more expertise to engage in those really hard to reach groups and young people, and they provide that bridge between youth justice and CAMS. And then moving down, that list, you can see CAMS Community Eating Disorder Service. So what we're now starting to do is see, in terms of the tier 3 and tier 4, a lot of these are provided by our mental health trust called West London Trust. The benefit of them providing the range of services from tier 2, tier 3 to tier 4 is being able to provide some co-location, easier kind of movement through the various parts of the system, really good linkage up between the different parts of CAMS. So they provide a community eating disorder service for young people, and it offers really innovative, very highly specialised service that combines intensive community-based interventions, but they also do structured admissions in wards, in paediatric wards. They offer family therapy, psychology, nursing, psychiatric help to those who are struggling with eating difficulties. And really what they're trying to do is manage complex eating disorders locally without the need to go into those more specialist tier 4 inpatient admissions. And it's a relatively new service, and the numbers are small, but the outcomes are looking quite good. So last year they surpassed the national waiting times standard, with 100% of their routine cases were seen within 4 weeks, which is really positive. So then looking at forensic CAMS, just a note on that. So that's funded by NHS England. So it's a nationally funded, highly specialised service. So it's not funded by the CCG. So because of that, it's provided across multiple boroughs. This particular service, it sits between tier 3 and tier 4, so in that sort of specialist sort of box, but They can also work with young people sort of at tier 2 level. So when there may be a young person whose behaviours are escalating, or there's aggression that's escalating in schools, they can also work with them, with that group as well. And it's mainly 7 to 18 years old, but they predominantly see adolescents. It's also a service that doesn't actually directly provide treatment, but they actually provide advice to professionals. So they will be part of that sort of consultation advice process for any professionals who are working with young people as part of a CAMS, in a CAMS setting, so that they can manage escalating risk. Then we've got the CAMS crisis team. So they work typically with children, young people and families who are experiencing significant clinical risk to themselves. So they work alongside the community teams that we've just sort of heard about to really make sure that young people have daily access to mental health professionals, to help them get through a period of crisis. And hopefully what we hope is that this can prevent hospital admission. And if the admission is unpreventable, they can help the family and support them holistically. And then in the final sort of, the next tier up, we've got tier 4, inpatient. So this is highly specialised. So there's 2 services there called Collingham Garden and Lavender Walk. They're both residential facilities for children with complex, very sort of high mental health problems. Collingham Gardens is for young people under 13, and Lavender Walks for those aged 13 to 18. And then finally, the CAMS intensive home treatment. It's no longer a pilot. I think it's been established since June last year, again provided by West London Trust, and they support children and young people in crisis who are on that edge point of maybe needing to be admitted. But the team work with them to do that in very intensive work to prevent that admission. And so far, they've actually prevented a number of admissions in the borough. So that's really positive. So that's me. I'll hand back to Mandy.
Very comprehensive. So I'm going to skip through the next slides because actually this is just the information that we have already given you. So you will have been able to read this as the slides came to you. The Young Voice, actually, Jan is going to be presenting on behalf of Brenda Winnett, the voice of the young people. So just to say that we are regularly through our youth council liaising with our young people. So those voices will come through in the next presentations. And Young Hammersmith and Fulham Foundation have undertaken a piece of work identifying the mental health needs of children and young people from African communities, and that information is feeding into our understanding of how we need to respond. And I will come back to that a little bit further down in the presentation. Satwinder, over to you. Oh, I'm sorry, my dog's barking. I'm going to put myself on mute. Satwinder, over to you to talk about education.
Thank you. I'm just going to give you a very brief overview of some of the interventions and support we're providing to schools as young people return. Our key focus over the next term is to support schools in a safe return of young people, reconnecting both as staff and with young people, and recovery. The educational psychologists are linked to every school, as are school improvement advisors, as are specialist teachers. So every school has a link advisor and a link psychologist. And this term they will be focusing on continuing the support that they've been providing to SENCOs, to teachers and to young people. They are setting up planning meetings as we speak to go through individual young people's needs and plan any training that schools may wish to access, in addition to the educational psychologist delivering via twilight sessions the Wellbeing for Education Return programme, which is funded by DFE, and Tony alluded to the small grant that we've been given for that. That programme is focused on neuroscience and psychological education. It's aimed at building resilience and supporting staff in connecting with young people who may need additional or specialist input as time progresses. The educational psychologist will also continue to deliver the emotional literacy training programme, which is very, very well received by schools, which is a programme that's been running in Hammersmith and Fulham for over the last 2 years and is highly evaluated. And it provides specialist training for teaching assistants to support young people who may over time present with early signs of distress. So that programme will be launched over the next couple of months. Other areas that we're working on across the piece are recovery curriculum. The recovery curriculum is focused on and it's rooted in children's lived experience over lockdown. So again, supporting schools in thinking through curriculum differentiation, focusing on safety, literacy, behaviour and teaching and learning. Mind, I think the programme has been described already, that's being continued. And what my understanding is from the work that we've been doing collectively is that they will work with the educational psychologists and other practitioners to provide much more targeted support where it's appropriate, where we see most young people will return and will be resilient in coping with re-engaging with learning, but we may have some young people who may struggle, and Mind are partners in alongside psychologists in providing that very bespoke one-to-one therapeutic interventions where it's appropriate. And family support, again, Mandy's described our partnership with family support. They will continue to monitor and run the transition project, which began over August, over the lockdown period, in supporting our more vulnerable young people who missed out on the transition from year 6 to year 7. So there'll be a monitoring programme and an extension of that programme to ensure that young people have transition safely. I think that's me. Over to Mandy.
Thank you, Satwinder. So this is our final slide, and again, I think we've covered some of this already, but the piece that I really wanted to just finish with really is that we've got two areas here. It is the impact of COVID and then our ongoing work, which was work we were doing pre-COVID in relation to young people's mental health pathways. And we are working on both of these now. So we are, as I said, undertaking a joint strategic needs assessment. That's an assessment where we gather from a whole range of different data sets, local and national, to really dig deep into our local population and understand the level and the impact of mental health needs, which will then inform further development of our services. We absolutely recognise that the arena for mental health services is complicated, and for a young person and a parent whose child is developing distress, is in distress, then we absolutely recognise that working one's way through that system can be tricky. So we are working to co-produce with children, young people and their families a better understanding of those pathways, and we will be feeding this into our whole system review of mental health pathways for children and young people, identifying if we have any gaps in our provision, identifying and establishing whether all of our provision is targeted in the right place, and whether or not there's anything else we need to develop. We are working very, very closely with the CCG on this agenda, as well as with our providers. Our schools are absolutely central to this. Our schools are telling us on a daily basis the impact of COVID in relation to children's needs, and Jan will be able to give you a little bit more detail when she presents the return to school piece. But that's our presentation, which I'm now going to take down. Does that come down? Yep.
It has indeed.
Thank you.
Well, let me start by thanking all three of you for a very comprehensive and extensive presentation. Do we have any questions from committee members? I have several hands up. Nandini?
Thanks, Mandy, Satvinder, and Aisha for the presentation. I think Parents Act has been very closely involved with the mental health side of things, so I'm quite interested. I just have 3 questions to ask. Are most of these age services go up to 18? So you've presented most of the services up to the age range of 18, correct?
That's
and the second, yeah, sorry.
So shall I answer that now?
Yes, Mandy. I have 2 more questions as well.
Okay, I won't remember 3, Nandini, so I'll answer them in order if that's okay. So yes, most of these services go up to the age of 18. The MenCap transitions worker is very much there because it was recognised at the point at which the CCG commissioned that service that there were some issues in relation to transitioning from children's to adults. The difference being in relation to the mental health categories and thresholds between children's CAMS being much broader, adults being very much more at the acute level. Although any of you that may have been out, or if you wish to look at the health pack meeting that was held last week, a really interesting presentation was put forward in relation to the development of community mental health recovery models in adults, which we anticipate will very much fill some of that gap that we have historically experienced in transitions. But very much, Nandini, the transitions is very much one of our pathway pieces that we will be reviewing and ensuring that are effectively delivered.
And again, I wanted to find out if any of these kind of programs are time bound, like the MenCap transitions worker, the mind support in schools, etc. Did the mind support in schools really take off before pandemic? Because we heard that they are under recruitment and were not actually actively involved in delivering the service.
I can answer that one. So the Trailblazers have not been up and running for a long time. So they were really in their first year of operation up until up until April this year, and there were lots of plans, obviously, to expand and they've got targets in terms of access, and COVID has hampered that. I think it is fair to say, even despite COVID, that the access could be improved. So I think that's one of the things that we're trying to do is work with the mental health support teams to join up very closely with the whole CAMS pathway and make sure that they're embedded really in CAMS. But the other area we really think we need to do some more work is with GPs. So GPs knowing about the service, being involved and being able to access. So one of the things, for example, the mental health support teams are doing now is they're putting seminars on for the GPs, which will really increase awareness that this is a service that they can refer into and access, etc. So there's lots of things that we're trying to do, but I do take your point that I think it's all, they haven't necessarily been meeting all their targets. We understand why, and we've got a plan in action to help them meet their targets. And certainly part of that school return and post-COVID recovery is not just about recovery from COVID, but also about meeting those targets.
And the last question, very quickly, is I think after COVID, mental health is going to have take a very important place in the agenda. And I think what we also were quite worried about is, does family support and HF Mind program in schools, do they have expertise in SEN? Because that is another key, it's a different expertise altogether, and we do wonder if they could be tackling complex behaviors, etc., which may be presented after COVID.
I mean, I can only talk about the mental health support teams. Currently, they don't have specific workers with SEND experience. We've actually just put in a request to NHS England. So the Trailblazers have a very narrow field in that they can only do what they have the funding from NHS England to do. So we've requested from NHS England if we can put in place workers who can target specific groups. So, for example, neurodivergence and learning disability and autism. And I think SEND, spectrum and behaviour, I think was absolutely be something that we would want to look at for the future. But right now, it's very narrow in terms of what we can and cannot do with the funding we have from NHS England. So, but I wonder if it's perhaps about joining up with other parts of the system to make sure that they've got those links. So I don't know if Mandy and Satwinder, you may want to add.
Yeah. So if I add first, and then Satwinder may well also wish to add. So Nandini, at the more specialist end of the spectrum in terms of supporting with the impact of behaviour, we have the positive behaviour, complex behaviour support service that we are developing. So the CCG have funded an additional psychologist who will be working as part of the CAM service, working very, very closely with the disabled children's social work team. So that team will be delivering, working with our children who have autism and learning disabilities. So we will have a good spectrum of provision across the system.
Thank you, Mandy. I was just going to add that on the ground, in very practical terms, we are joining up with our practitioners in the Trailblazer to ensure that we are collaborating and understanding the support that's needed for certain young people. So that we're definitely developing much clearer pathways and joint working.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. We have Mark Loveday, or Councillor Loveday, yes. Sorry.
Yes, it's just a quick one to pick up on this point about Trailblazers and Mind. I was obviously slightly concerned that you obviously have worries about whether having placed the work with the Trailblazers work with Mind, that they're delivering on the performance as you mentioned. And there are of course other people out there, sometimes even more specialist. My son, for example, works for OCD Action, who do a lot of work with young people, mental health work, young people in a very specialist area. Have you been looking at perhaps splitting the contracts a little bit and going to other providers of Mind?
I mean, unfortunately, I mean, I wouldn't say we're worried about Mind's performance. I think we understand why it is where it is, and I think they're actually doing quite well given the circumstances. One of the other things I haven't mentioned is the significant recruitment challenges that we've got. We've got mental health Trailblazers across 3 boroughs, quite a few boroughs in North West London, and all of them face significant challenges in recruiting, especially to clinical posts. So the issues around not meeting targets is not because they are not good or capable, it's because they've struggled to recruit because of the market out there in terms of getting the right people into the teams. And I think COVID has really not helped. Secondly, we're not allowed to change. We won't be able to change the providers because it is a mental health. So it's an NHS England bid. So it's money that comes straight. It passes straight through. It's funding that comes nationally. The CCG working very closely with the council. We work together to put in a really good bid. I think the plans that Mind have are really solid. So it is more about working with them. But what we'd be really interested in is linking up with organisations like you mentioned, OCD Action. I think it's about making those networks and connections as they move from becoming fully set up and running, which they are now, and fully recruited to, which they are now. So moving from that first initial setup phase to really driving forward the work they're doing and putting out those tentacles into different, voluntary organisations, getting out to other schools, etc. So that would be really welcome if we can get more information about that.
Okay.
Councillor Sanderson or Sanderson.
Thank you everyone for spending confidence review of the mental health provision in the borough. So a few questions. Firstly, could an overview and an explainer of the mental health provision for young people be produced and shared amongst all councillors so we can all familiarise ourselves with it? I'm going to take the nodding as a yes.
Yes.
Brilliant, thank you. Secondly, and you might track this already, but do you have a breakdown in demographics for those who access the mental health services to see if there are particular demographics or communities we need to do more to reach or promote this to?
We're not collating all of that information in one place at the moment, and I see Dr. Lang is still in the meeting. So the joint strategic needs assessment that we are beginning to launch will enable us to pull that information out. Dr. Lang, would your area of specialism? Do you mind?
Yep. So what we'll do is we'll take say national comparisons and the number of people we'd expect to use a particular service, and hopefully with Aisha's help, have a look at the ethnic minority breakdown. And if we think that a particular group is underrepresented, like not coming forward for mental health, then what we would classically do is then encourage and raise awareness and try and redress that balance. So Michael Mazessian is our trainee doctor, and I'm supervising him to do that work. So what we'll do is we'll do an ethnic breakdown. We'll do how many children of each kind of ethnic group we would expect in each category, and then when her analysts share their data, if we think, for example, I don't know, there's not many white British boys using the service, then we would think, why is that? Is that stigma, or are they not thinking mental health difficulties apply to them?
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to ask about gender as well as ethnicity and see if there's any breakdown there, because purely anecdotally, I can imagine there are fewer boys accessing the service.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. And then finally, I think you mentioned in the presentation that 100% of young people are being seen within 4 weeks upon referral to CAMHS, which is amazing. It'd be really helpful to understand.
Sorry, that was eating disorder services.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
That was very specifically that specialist service that's been set up.
Well, that's also still very good about that one service. My kids are similarly high. But for the rest of CAMHS, it'd be really helpful to understand what happens after they've been seen, because I've heard stories of CAMHS discharging young people either too early or people with additional needs who CAMHS felt they couldn't help, who have then ended up in crisis. So it'd be really good to understand the journey of what happens after referral, especially in the cases of young people who CAMHS feel that they can't help, and what then happens to them.
Yes, I think I wonder if it's worth looking into maybe getting, because the provider will have this information, so West London Trust will be able to certainly talk about the experiences of children as they move from tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, etc., and the difficulties in terms of those different services that they have, maybe, and maybe some case studies or examples. Obviously we have data, but I'm not sure whether we can get data that tracks individual children through the system, if that makes sense. But I can find out if we collate that kind of data. But I wonder whether case studies or examples might be a good place to start.
Thank you. Thank you. And also, I mean, that might tie into Nandini's question about liaising with other groups as well for provision of people with additional need. Thank you. And then my final question was, it's more family services. So it's, do we have support in place for families where it's the parent in crisis, not just the young person?
You have an answer for that?
Bev, are you able to answer that, or shall I?
Yes, so there are a number of agencies that we use to refer parents onto when they're experiencing mental health. Usually the route is through their GP, so the parent's GP into whatever service is available. And obviously we know that for different diagnoses and different treatment plans, there'll be longer or shorter waiting lists. But certainly our staff do know how to access support for parents who are experiencing mental health issues.
And sorry, that's all really good, but in terms of the rest of the family unit, if the parent is in crisis, is there support for children whose parents are going through a mental health crisis?
I think in the same way that's been described, we'd use either the early help service or our statutory social work services, depending on what the issue are, to provide support to the wider ranging of the family.
Thank you. That was my questions.
Okay. Are you okay? Lovely. Councillor Sadiq.
Thank you very much for everyone's doing the great work and very comprehensive presentation. My question is regarding do we have any data or number within the last 6 months? Is there any increase in this mental health within the borough? Or if yes, what sort of resources, we required for your team? Do you need more resources or more numbers or more team members? How you can cope this if there's any increase in this, especially if someone lost loved ones and they need more, support in this regard. And you have a small team, I can understand. So, what?
Yeah. Okay, Mandy, you can answer that.
So yes, I'll do my best to answer that. So we absolutely recognise that, as you say, some young people may well have lost loved ones. They will have experienced isolation. They will have experienced a great deal of worry, uncertainty. We absolutely recognise that young people's mental health will be affected by the pandemic, and I'm afraid it's not over, is it? So actually, we've still got tricky times ahead of us. So we do absolutely recognise that. We don't have local data, as I said. We only have access to the national data. But the needs assessment that we are going to be undertaking will help us to start pull some of that data out in relation to the impact of COVID on our children's, young people mental health. In terms of the resources, we actually have a good amount of services in Hammersmith and Fulham. We're really fortunate to have the mental health trailblazer. That is an enormous amount of resource that not every local area has. We have a strong CAMS service. We have services that are commissioned by and delivered by the local authority. So we have a lot of service. I think what we have recognised is that over years they may not have worked so well together. But actually, we are before the pandemic. We formed a working group. We were already beginning to work together, and we recognise there's more to do. So it is really about making sure our services are targeted in the right place, and the needs assessment will help us to inform whether we are targeting our services in the right place. So I hope that answers your question. I think the answer really is I probably can't answer it quite yet.
Thank you.
Thank you. Eleanor? Eleanor, did you want to ask a question? You're on mute.
I just wanted to ask about leisure and art activities. Would you need to expand these in order to, expand the service? In order, because you said you've got a full service in the borough. They're obviously useful.
Did we hear the question?
Was that about leisure and art?
Yes, art and leisure activities.
So additional to the services that we described here as being the very specific emotional and mental health wellbeing services, there is a vast range of services that are provided by the local authority, that are provided in the community. We have a wide range of services. We'd probably need to come back to you with that offer, and we'd probably need to ask colleagues from other departments to share that information. But there is a wide range of services available. I think one of our challenges is getting those services to children and young people during COVID, as people have not yet fully returned to work. So an awful lot has been put through a digital mechanism, and our young people, fortunately, with their smartphones, do like digital means. We can try get you some more information.
Thank you.
Lovely. Councillor Cohen.
Thank you, Chair. Well, on that note, what Mandy said around smartphones, obviously there's plenty of fantastic work that goes on throughout all the tiers, but particularly with family support, I remember about a year or so ago going for a demo at Hammersmith Academy, where the academy was working with family support and Brain in Hand to develop an app for young people in order to help keep them into school. So they had a particular cohort of young people who are struggling to cope with the pressures that are in high school at normal time and the anxieties, and they worked together to develop an app which would help them sort of I don't know if self-regulate is the right word, but try and self-regulate their behaviour in order to help them through the school day and stay in mainstream school. So there's an element of innovation there as well. And obviously this is, again, in normal times, it's a complex enough landscape, let alone now. And we're only one part of that jigsaw together, and there's plenty of partners. I've mentioned a couple with Family Support and Hammersmith Academy, but the CCG is also a big partner. And I just want to say thank you to Aisha for coming to represent them here at the meeting, because it certainly gives it a different perspective and different side. So thank you very much for that, and also to thank the committee for discussing this as well. Obviously the pandemic has affected all of us in different ways, but I think it's not unfair to say that young people have been overlooked, I think, a bit with the pressures and the anxiety that the pandemic has brought, and that's if they haven't been directly affected by it through the tragic circumstances it can bring. And not only are they having to adjust to a new world, but also they're largely going to be left picking up the pieces of the other side when we come out of this. So thank you to all of you as well for lending your focus towards the support that we're trying to give them at the most difficult time I think any young person has faced in recent memory.
Thank you very much, Councillor Culhane. Do we have any other questions? Right, I would just like to make a couple of points myself. Mine is actually in relation to some of the questions you've asked that have been asked before, which is around the demographics and getting that breakdown. Although you've said clearly we're not in a position at this present moment to do that. Is that something that's going to be a priority going forward, is my question. And my second question is around access. Although all of this hard work is clearly going on, there are people out there that do not understand or know about what we're doing. Okay, so in terms of access, do we have any plans or a strategy about promoting what you are planning to provide as a service, or what the offer is going forward in the near future?
So Dr. Lang's piece of work will very much help us bring the data together, and that is a priority. So Dr. Lang has agreed to run the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment, and we're hoping, I think, probably to be in a position to start analysing that data by the end of the year. Dr. Lang, do you think?
We'll have finished it all by the end of the year, so we want the data now ASAP so we can start crunching. Yes.
Excellent.
So that there we go. So that's great. And actually, joint strategic needs assessments are enormous pieces of work because of the number of data sets that have to be analysed. So that will put us in a much better position. So in relation to promoting, we obviously have our main contacts with families are their GPs and are their schools, or their childcare, or their early years, or their post-16 providers. So we are working very, very closely with our, as Satwinder has said, with our education teams, with our contacts with the schools, making sure that our schools very much understand how to access. We have our local offer platform, we have our family information platform, we have our Hammersmith and Fulham website. So as we do this piece of work, we will develop and promote, and we will very much be able to have some perhaps better pulled together documents. At the moment, we could probably pull you up a leaflet on about 20 services, but actually what we couldn't do is pull you a leaflet that showed you the pathways through all of the services. So we need to design that, and that's that co-production piece, and that is that analysis and making sure that our pathways are working. So that's our programme of review, which will have a product that will describe those services in a much more intensive way.
Right, well, Mandy, Setwinder and Aisha, thank you very much for a great presentation, and I look forward, if we can, having a further review update early next year. Thank you to all of you. Moving on now to item number 8, youth engagement. Jan?
Hello.
There we go.
Hi, I'm Jan Parnell. I'm the Director of Education in Hammersmith and Fulham, and we've heard a lot about all of the services that we've been developing and responding to during the global pandemic. But very much we wanted to hear about our own students and the student voice in terms of getting their input into hearing what they have to say about their experience, and also the very rich information we get from the student voice in relation to helping us develop policy and to be a really responsive council. And I know that you know, the Youth Council has presented at various CPACs in the past, and it's very much at the heart of what we do. So we've got a very brief report about what we have been doing, and of course I would like to introduce my colleagues. First of all, Brenda Winnett, who you will know, who has been leading on this and co-leading with our young people, but also a little bit later on Helen Green, who's helped support and develop the inclusive approach and broadening our reach in terms of our youth voice. So over to Brenda, please.
Hi everybody, good to see you all. Yeah, so prior to COVID, we had a massive recruitment drive, as Councillor Holder will know, and Councillor Culhane. We got lots of new membership into Youth Council, and it was really, really buzzing. We had lots of really exciting sessions. And the elections were all planned for our youth mayor, member of youth parliament. They all did their videos, really, really going really well. And then COVID hit us and schools closed. So really it was a real shame for the effort and work that the young people have put in. But they remained really, really active, the youth councils, throughout the whole of lockdown period, and have done since through the whole summer as well. We obviously inevitably lost a few young people that didn't really want to do things in a virtual way. And we've tried lots of different ways of keeping in touch virtually. So it's been a big learning process for all of us. But we started off on conference calls, I think, for 1 week, which was really not good. And then we then went on to using Teams. We use Zoom. We've used and now we're using Google Meets to meet regularly, weekly. That's a really much more accessible platform, and it's got the words can come up on the screen as people are talking, and it's just a lot easier than Zoom and other platforms to use. It's a lot less noise in the background and so on. So we've been meeting weekly. They themselves decided throughout the summer that they wanted to focus on getting information out to young people in a really youth-focused way. So they felt there was loads of information about COVID. A lot of it really confusing, a lot of it not relevant to them. And they really were, you know, as Mandy and the colleagues' presentation really has talked about, which has been really interesting to hear, really, you know, worried about young people's mental health and isolation and the effects of the exams and all of the different things that have hit on young people throughout COVID. So they got that, they produced basically 5 series of youth focused information and got that out as widely as they possibly could at that time. And they also produced a number of videos, one of which fed into the work that Mandy's doing as well, on the impact of COVID on young people really and their mental health. They produced some poems and performed those poems and worked with a number of different services to get the young people they work with involved as well. And they also did a video for schools focusing on what they want schools to think about in support of their young people when returning more generally. Sat Windsor's team have been amazing as well, the educational psychologists, and helped us to really help get messages out about well-being for young people and so on. And yeah, so they've done lots and lots of work. So what they also then during lockdown started to think, we want to, you know, get a lot more inclusive and start to reach out, because usually what they would do was have road shows around in different youth centres, youth projects, and try and engage young people that are working with other services in that way. But when obviously they could no longer do that, it was that we're just now working in silo and we don't want to do that. So we had a number of discussions over the summer, and working really closely with colleagues, Scott and Helen, my manager, focusing a lot more on young people with special educational needs and disabilities, and trying to think how we can make Youth Council a lot more inclusive going forward. And it's a learning process. We're getting better and better virtually. We've still got a way to go. But next week, we've got a big event planned for next Tuesday, the 29th. So I'll send out invites as well to that. But we've got our Youth Council, our Children in Care Council, our peer researchers from the Young Hammersmith and Fulham Foundation, Health Watch, Youth Health Watch, that look at health services in the borough, and a number of other groups that are focused on youth voice, Alfie, various of the services. The Youth Offending Service are involved, and I've put that out all over Children's Services and our targeted services. And what we're trying to do is make sure that our Youth Council is much more proportionate and representative of our young people and the needs and the issues that they may experience as well. So that's what we're trying to do. They're the big things that we're working on at the moment. Big shout out to the young people, because they've been amazing despite the stuff that they've been going through themselves personally and within their families through COVID as well. And they've been a pleasure to work with, really. So I'll let Helen talk a bit more about how we're working together and what the plans are for going forward, if that's okay, and I'll take any questions when we've finished.
Right, hi everyone, I'm Helen, and Brenda's really done a good introduction there to what we're trying to do. So we started a while back thinking about some form of SEND advisory board. This was pre-COVID, first meeting due on the 27th of March, I think. Key dates there, so obviously face-to-face wasn't possible. So there's been far more of a move to an inclusive youth voice. So it is a work in progress. I think Brenda's talked it through. We've tried numerous different platforms. We're also linking up with quite a few voluntary sector organisations, some people who are, Alfie particularly, are well versed in the use of tools, remote tools for supporting peer support and inclusive youth voice for special needs and disabilities. The network meeting next week is growing tremendously, and I think it has been really useful in many ways. The remote working people have been very generous with their time, their expertise and their resources. So we know that there are certain groups that tend not to or don't feel comfortable joining in these more mainstream sessions. So it's again looking at different ways that young people can be included, given their preferred communication methods. Yes, the remote platforms work in some ways. We've got some people who feel more comfortable with their own groups, and then we feed the voices in through those mechanisms. We know that there are other groups who are really good at linking up with harder to reach groups. So it's very much that meeting next week is quite a key event really in really taking us into the next stage. We also, with Brenda and Scott, we've been looking at ways of measuring it. We've mentioned demographics. I noticed that was mentioned in the previous piece a lot, and the data. So again, it's looking at how do we get that proportionality better, and what is it that is making a difference to the way in which we work. It's still there's still a lot to learn, and every week we kind of move forward a little bit. We're now on Google Meets, as Brenda said, because the captions is much better. People mainly can access it. We know we still have some issues with not everybody can afford the accounts for those sorts of things, or would have a smartphone to be able to access things on. So the other piece of the network is through the schools, which Brenda has traditionally worked on. Again, we're looking at reasonable adjustments, the pace, the communication methods through those systems, and different ways of doing things. So it's going to be quite a lot of diversity there. It's quite a lot of pieces of work to develop further. but we are building up that network so that we're supporting one another, streamlining some of the work as well, because we don't want to be duplicating stuff. So what we were conscious of with our voluntary sector partners was that they had youth voice as well within their organisations. So it's trying to bring those different voices together.
Well, thank
you, Helen, and thank you, Brenda. So we're ready to take any questions now through the chair. Thank you.
Do we have any questions? Yes, we do. We have Nandini.
No, this is not a question. This is actually a comment and a bit of praise for Brenda and Helen. I think I've been part of the CPAC for a very long time, and I've always said, please include SEND and disabilities. And I think it's finally happening, because my son is also part of the Youth Council and he's really enjoying it. Wherever he is, he comes running in to take part in the meeting. So big praise and a pat on the back for both of you. Thank you very much.
That's really nice to hear, actually, because it is a learning process, and I'm learning so much myself and doing things virtually in a very different way. But that's thank you, Nandini, because that's really nice to hear. It makes it all kinds of worthwhile.
Yeah, absolutely agree, and it's great that he's participating in it, which is fantastic news. And I forgot to mention we have inclusive apprentices, co-production assistants who are working with us, again, trying to get a different voice, a different way of participating.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Bev? No? Right. Councillor Culhane.
Chair, apologies, I couldn't let this item go without thanking Helen and Brenda for all their work with the Youth Council and young people in this borough. I make no apologies for saying that the young people in this borough are the heart and soul of it, and it's always a challenge to get as many young people's voices heard as possible, for a whole variety of reasons. But both Brenda and Helen have been doing a fantastic job in empowering young people, not only to make their own voices heard, but as I've said previously at other meetings, to do so much work at making sure other young people, their peers up and down the borough, have their voices heard as well and play a part in helping shape the future of this borough, which now more than ever is going to be particularly needed. So again, I'm sure I speak for all of us when I thank Brenda and Helen and all the young people who have been playing a role over the last 6 months. And again, in making sure that young people are not forgotten by society, and the role that they're going to be playing over the next 6 months, which are in many ways probably going to be much more difficult in some ways. So thank you both, and thank you to all the young people who've been playing a role in this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Can I just add, therefore, that the youth voice is still clearly work in progress, but you're doing a tremendous job so far from the sounds of things. Keep me involved as I try to be, and hopefully in the future we'll have a youth engagement network that people will not be challenged anywhere else in the London boroughs. Anyhow, thank you.
We certainly will. Brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Right, moving on to the next item. Sorry, I should have said, Jan, thank you very much. You and Helen as well. Again, Jan, can we move on to item 9, return to schools update, a verbal update from you?
Yes, thank you, and thanks for allowing us to do a verbal update today. So prior to the schools going back in September, I just wanted to acknowledge the tremendous amount of work that went on during the summer holidays by the Education Service and a range of partners, including our commissioning team. We work with the voluntary sector, and we also work with some volunteers from the original civic response to the pandemic. And can I just say that I'm really pleased to get the reports in from various participants. I'll give a more full report if you'd like that. But we reached out over the summer across 20+ activities to over 3,000 children and young people, which was phenomenal. And that just shows the sort of community spirit and the level of engagement and participation in Hammersmith and Fulham. 3,000 young people actively engaged in the whole range of things. Almost too numerous to mention, but I do have to give credit to our youth clubs. They engage particularly with our harder to reach young teenagers, many of whom were in alternative provision and several of whom were known to the YOS. The London Sports Trust, again, amazing, working with the whole range of youth in our parks. The football clubs, I'm not going to mention them in case we have division there. And also some eco clubs, again, picking up with some of the charities, Hammersmith Community Gardeners Association being one of them, providing face-to-face, safely distanced activities with not only younger children, but also with the families. And again, through the food bank, somebody who's very close and volunteers there, we had wild reading for the first time, which happened outside in wonderful environments, Phoenix Farm being one of them, Ravenscourt, glass houses, where children who have been identified by some of their teachers as maybe falling behind, needing additional reading support, they attended to do reading with adults and to also share their favourite books, and it was extremely popular. So just also thanks to the Parks Department, who provided the most amazing array of marquees, tents and sunshine cover. And these were erected across Hammersmith and Fulham open spaces so that we had safe places to be. So that's absolutely amazing. And why is it important? Well, it's really important because we targeted across our schools children who were perhaps most vulnerable and needed additional support in re-engaging with learning, because our schools have been open and they have been open to vulnerable children and key workers, but not everybody was reached. And we wanted to make sure that they were, so that they were ready to come back and be with their peer group, be with their friendship groups, and be in the right frame of mind as much as they could be for going back to formal schooling. So I'm really pleased to report, colleagues, that all schools are open fully in Hammersmith and Fulham. And we just had one school that had partial opening, and that was because Cambridge School wanted to create more space for their young adults and to make sure they could safely distance and support their learning. So we now have a full return, and thanks to Phoenix Academy for providing that space for Cambridge and having a good partnership there. What are we doing then? Well, in order to support our head teachers in the most unprecedented times, we are continuing to really communicate with them very regularly, but trying not to overwhelm them at the same time. Would you believe it? There have been, I've been counting, 292 DFE guidance documents since March that have been sent to our head teachers. That's 292, often 10, 20, 30 pages long. We've been interpreting those, we've been getting them out on a daily basis. We've been having one-to-one calls with some head teachers and also group calls. So thank you to colleagues in Lillahusset for coordinating amazing comms with our head teachers to help support them. As was mentioned by Satwinder, we actually have our own Hammersmith and Fulham recovery curriculum, and that's been focusing on getting back into reading. It's also helping both teachers, parents and children on the whole new world of blended learning, online learning, as well as face-to-face contact, which has become our new norm. And also, as we've referenced, the emotional well-being. So this isn't just benefiting Hammersmith and Fulham children and families, it's also benefiting a wider group. So the University College of London, the Institute of Education, the British Council have shared our resources across the globe, and through Global Classrooms in Africa, our colleagues and friends in different parts of the world are using some of our resources. And we're now about to set up a global classrooms project across our primary schools, linking in to some of these really important places that we want to be connected with in a global way. Hammersmith and Fulham remains a really popular destination for our NQTs, who we really need to support. Again, they're not having a usual experience of teacher training, but our NQTs, we've been told, were one of the most popular boroughs and one of the most popular places to learn and to train in the entire country. And we've been hosting NQT network and support sessions. And finally, I'm afraid we have been dominated by testing. The testing debacle that happened in the summer, and our head teachers are still recoiling from that. However, now what's on their mind is actually the testing of teachers and the testing of young adults. And so working very closely, if you've heard, through different programs, the SCIDS program, but also constantly in contact on a daily basis with Public Health England and Dr. Lang. We've been putting out a whole range of support for our colleagues in schools. And also not only schools, but we're now turning our attention to the private nurseries as well, which we have in Hammersmith and Fulham. And also we've had many requests in recent days from our independent schools to get some guidance there. So we're trying to manage it within our resources, and really it's an ongoing thing. So I'd just like to thank the collaborative effort of getting our children ready for school, and thank you for listening tonight. I'll take any questions.
Any questions from committee members?
I'd like, oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's all right, Jane, carry on.
So if you'll bear with me, actually, what I'd like to do is to end on, I hope this works, colleagues, apologies if it doesn't. I'd like to end on a very short clip, which is young people who were in lockdown in primary schools. They were there with children that perhaps they weren't familiar with. We took in a lot of children from the hospitals, and we took in a lot of key worker children. And these children worked together with the Lyric Theatre, and we gave them the title of Heroes. So they produced a script with a very famous director from the Lyric, and they then translated that script. And some of our wonderful young actors in Hammersmith and Fulham acted out the script, and I've got just two very short clips. This is all in the children's voices, and thank you, Hannah, for sorting out the technology. So sadly, we didn't get any sound there. So thankfully there were some subtitles. But anyway, we'll put it into the reference so that you can actually see there are 4 films that were made. And as I say, all scripted by young people. These are young children of 9 and 10 years old on the theme of heroes. So apologies, there wasn't any sound coming through the YouTube, but we'll make sure that it's in the minutes. So thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Jan. Can I just say, colleagues, do you have any last minute questions you want to put to Jan? If you don't, can I just say the next meeting of the Children in Education Oh, I've got Mark. Are you wanting to say
Yes,
something?
just a general. Somebody contacted me during the course of the meeting. I just wanted to check. There was I was told that there's been an outbreak at Queen's Manor School. Is that right? Hello?
Yes, there has been several outbreaks as Dr. Lang has indicated, you know, with the pandemic accelerating currently. We've had just a number of single outbreaks. So it's actually a single individual who's tested positive. This has happened in one of our secondary schools in the last week, one single year 10. And we've also had now 3 primaries with one single primary child testing positive. This is going to become something that's happening on a daily, if not a weekly basis. And our schools have been absolutely amazing in working with us in trying to contain this.
And do we have any, what's the position at the moment on the number of outbreaks that we consider acceptable before, I don't say acceptable, but you know, the trigger for actually you know, suspending the school for teaching?
We want to keep all of our schools open, and so we're all already working in bubbles. So this is part of the guidance from the DFE that we've disseminated and worked with our schools on outbreak plans. So as I said, at the moment, those are individual you know, cases within schools, and we've taken precautions there. The DFE have set up a helpline. They're triaging any questions from head teachers and advising on which children to send home, not individuals, but, you know, triaging the bubble scenario. And also I then refer to Dr. Lang in terms of triangulating that. We set up a whole series of online forms now. We don't want to make it too onerous, but we do want to track obviously and trace and feed into our central system any individual cases that are positive. Currently, as we stand, as I say, one individual case in a secondary school, year 10, and 3 in primary schools.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Jan.
Thank you.
Councillor Sadiq.
Sorry, Chair, is no question, is just clarification. In the beginning of the meeting, my computer screen was frozen about for a minute or 2. I couldn't hear the questions, but I was present throughout the meeting, and no declaration of interest for the record.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, for the record. Okay, item number 10, date of next meeting.
Chair, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Colhane, I didn't see you.
Chair, I'm so sorry, and I promise not to make a habit of speaking after every item that your committee's moving forward. I just want to obviously thank Jan for giving the report to the committee, and again reiterate our support and thanks to the schools for the Herculean efforts that they have put in over the past year. But it'd be remiss of me not to also thank parents and families, extended or otherwise, up and down the borough, who have played a huge role in that success over the past year. But you know, I found lockdown difficult enough and the pandemic difficult enough, and I haven't got any young children to look after. So I have absolute credit to every family and parent and sibling in many cases who have continue to help engage young people in education at home, whilst also having to hold down a career of their own, and all of the consequences that the pandemic has brought. So I'm sure, again, I speak for all of us, and when we pass on our thanks to all of the parents and families who've played a crucial role over the past year.
Thank you very much, Councillor Colhane. I'm sure many parents out there will be very thankful for your speech. Moving on now, back to item number 10, date of next meeting. We have scheduled the 9th of November. So please put that in your diary. I will now like to end and thank everyone for attending and watching tonight's meeting. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.